Lake Norman or Lake Wylie? Which one's better? If you're thinking about living on the water near Charlotte, there are really two lakes that everyone compares. Lake Norman and Lake Wylie. But they are both very different from each other. So before you decide to make your move, consider these 5 things I'll be discussing in today's video. We'll be breaking down the pros and cons to both, and you'll want to hear this if you're planning on moving here to Charlotte. If we haven't met yet, I'm Cameron and I work with buyers and people relocating to Charlotte every week. And I get a lot of people who are moving into the city and want to live by the lake because, well, who doesn't, right? Usually people don't think about how big of a difference being in one lakefront home can have versus the other. And the answer on what will work best for you really depends on what kind of lifestyle you want. Let's start with the biggest difference, literally. Lake Norman is the largest lake in North Carolina. It covers more than 32,000 acres with over 500 miles of shoreline. Because of that, it really feels like a major lake destination. There are multiple towns around it, tons of marinas, restaurants on the water, and big boating culture. It's one of those kind of places people spend entire weekends out on the lake. And now comparing that to Lake Wylie is much smaller at roughly 13,000 acres with around 325 miles of shoreline. Because it's smaller, it feels quieter and a little bit more residential. You still have boating and lake activities, but it doesn't have quite the same destination lake energy that Lake Norman has. A lot of people describe it this way. Lake Norman feels like a major lake region. Lake Wylie feels like more of a lake community. The second major difference is location relative to Charlotte. Lake Norman sits just north of the city and includes towns like Cornelius, Denver, Davidson, Huntersville, and Mooresville. Many people who work in Charlotte commute down Interstate 77 from Lake Norman, as the east side of the lake is much busier than the west side. And that's something you should know about too. I-77 can get congested during peak commute hours, especially southbound in the morning, but this is going to be the same for both lakes really. Both, if you're working in uptown Charlotte, are going to be very difficult to commute from during rush hours, so definitely consider that before making your move. Now, let's talk about Lake Wylie. Lake Wylie sits southwest of Charlotte and shares the South Carolina border. Most communities around Lake Wylie connect into Charlotte through the Steel Creek area. For people working near the airport, south end or western side of the city, the commute from Lake Wylie can actually be much easier than Lake Norman. But again, unless you're prepared for at least a 45-minute commute or longer, I would reconsider. It really depends on how often you'll be commuting to work, if at all really, to help you decide on which place you should look into. Now let's talk about something everyone cares about, home prices. Generally speaking, Lake Norman has more expensive waterfront real estate because the lake is larger and more established. There are more luxury waterfront homes and higher end communities. It's not uncommon to see lakefront properties on Lake Norman ranging anywhere from high 800s to multi-million dollars. Now, this will largely depend on your location and water frontage. However, the west side of the lake doesn't get as much attention as it deserves in my opinion, and you'll often be paying about 20% less for homes on the west side than the east side. So if you're okay with being on a less busy side, it's definitely something you should consider. Lake Wylie, on the other hand, often offers more attainable lakefront pricing. You can still find waterfront homes here starting in the $600,000 to $700,000 range, depending on the property. Now, keep in mind, there are generally more sloped lots for waterfront homes on Lake Wylie than Lake Norman. And of course, that is something else that you'll strongly want to consider before purchasing your home. Now, of course, there are exceptions to both, but overall, Lake Wylie tends to be cheaper if your goal is simply to get on the water here in Charlotte. The surrounding towns also have very different personalities. Lake Norman, being a huge lake, is often divided into the west side and east side, like I alluded to earlier, because they feel very different from one another. On the east side, you have more popular towns like Davidson, Cornelius, Huntersville, and Mooresville, and all have really developed strong identities. Davidson, for example, has a beautiful walkable downtown with restaurants, local shops, and that college town atmosphere that you get from Davidson College. This is the place you want to be if you're looking for a lake town with tons of entertainment at your fingertips. Cornelius, on the other hand, has a lot of marina activity and has phenomenal lakefront properties. Mooresville is the larger one that feels kind of like it's city on its own. Mooresville has a big NASCAR presence, Trump golf course, and a lot of shopping and office space. Now, contrast all of this to the west side of the lake, where you find towns such as Denver and Sherrills Ford, which are much smaller than these areas that I mentioned previously. Here, you will often feel like you have escaped the hustle and bustle of the city and living in a quiet neighborhood, enjoying the water at your speed. There isn't too much shopping and entertainment, but that's what some people really enjoy being over here. And of course, the price tag does follow that too. Now, talking about Lake Wylie, that's generally going to be quieter and more residential too, much like the west side of Lake Norman. There are still lake communities, marinas, restaurants, but you don't have the same concentration of towns and entertainment areas as you do around Lake Norman. Now, some people would rather be here and believe it's much more peaceful and less crowded, which leads into another big factor to consider, and that's water activities. If boating and lake activities are important to you, Lake Norman is huge and definitely something that you'll probably prioritize. Because of its size, there's plenty of room for boating, wake surfing, fishing, and spending the day on the water. It's also more active. On summer weekends, it will get busy with boats, so be prepared for that, but some people love the energy it provides. Others may hate it. Lake Wylie, being smaller, can feel more relaxed. It's still great for boating and fishing, but the overall energy is a lot quieter compared to Lake Norman. So if you want that bigger lake experience with more activity, Lake Norman will win. If you prefer something slightly calmer, Lake Wylie will probably be more appealing in that aspect. So which lake is better? The truth is, it depends on your priorities. If you want a busier lake with tons of space for water activities while being nearby shopping and entertainment, Lake Norman is probably going to be the better choice. If you want something quieter, more tranquil, waterfront home with a cheaper price tag, Lake Wylie might make more sense. The good news is Charlotte offers two very different lifestyles around the lake, which are both about 30 to 40 minutes of the city. The key is deciding which environment matches how you actually want to live. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. What do you think of the two lakes? What's your preference? If you think about buying around Lake Norman or Lake Wylie and want help comparing specific neighborhoods or properties, feel free to reach out. I would love to be a resource along the way. And if you're relocating and want more videos breaking down different areas of the city, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.